Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we continue our week focus on the Primarch scattering with the Erda factor, the mother of the Primarchs. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be referencing events from across the Horus Heresy, particularly the Siege of Terra novels, Saturnine by author Dan Abnett, and Warhawk by author Chris Wraight. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, the Primarch scattering has been a source of intrigue and mystery for decades now, an ever unwinding conundrum that as often as it would tease you one way, you'd find a hint to counter it another. All really as ever in the lore, coming down to how you simply feel about it. That was seemingly until we got to the Siege of Terra, and we got a huge revelation come quite out of the blue with the introduction of Erda. Within the fourth installment of the Siege of Terra series, Saturnine, the perpetual John Grammaticus would find the hidden and exiled Erda, and request her help in stopping the Emperor, stopping the whole mess of the heresy, the end of the universe as they knew it. This Erda would reveal herself to be a perpetual, indeed in her words, the second most powerful of their kind, behind him, the Emperor. Though she would make it clear she was nothing compared, that the Emperor was simply magnitudes upon magnitudes more powerful than all of the Perpetuals combined. Like many of their people, she was once allied with the Emperor, one of his many followers, committed to his cause. And it was through this conversation she was revealed to be the mother of the Primarchs. The Primarchs, she said, with a small nod. They're not actually perpetuals in any biological sense. They're the artificial equivalents of the perpetuals, functionally immortal beings born from his blood and power and vigor, coded to accelerate his program even faster. They were designed to live long enough to see his plan through to the end, and not die away so quickly, the way humans did. And they were indoctrinated from birth to follow his word, and not have opinions of their own, like naturally occurring perpetuals. They were made to service his dream. He took what nature had wrought in the perpetuals, and he built his own pathologized version, and through them, their genetic lines, the legions. He didn't do that alone. Erda was silent for a moment. Outside the deserteur sighed, and the neck bells of livestock clunked. He did not, she said. I was still with him then, one of the last few. Me, my colleague Astarte, a few others. I had misgivings, we all did, but he was very convincing, compelling. And by then, he had become more powerful than ever. He needed a geneticist to work with him, and that was my art. And he needed a biological source, a gene stock rare enough to mix with his own, a perpetual. You. Me. I was the other source, a genetic donor. He is the father of mankind. I am the surrogate mother, and the clinician, and the midwife. We made 20 fine sons, but he allowed me no influence. I was just a biological instrument, and once they were born, I began to properly understand the future he had prepared for them. The bitter destiny. Now, I guess the idea of the Primarchs having a mother in purely biological terms, shouldn't be too much of a shock. It's the merging of two parents' genes that create a child after all. I guess it's only logical the Emperor must have used another's genes in the process of creating the Primarchs. However, after decades of only ever hearing about the Emperor and his Primarchs, of him instilling a portion of his own nature or aspect within each of them, to suddenly have a mother to the Primarchs introduced, well, that was a bit of a shock, to say the least. However, that wasn't all, because in the very next breath of their conversation, that shock got sent into the stratosphere. And so Erda, having told John Grammaticus she merely walked away from the Emperor and his project, was stopped by John, as he knew that that was not quite the full story. "No, not quite," said John. "This part I know. Eldrad told me. You didn't just step away, Erda. You tried to stop him. I tried to save my sons. You scattered them." She sat forward and stared at the ground, her hands across her mouth. "I did. I took them from him. I cast them onto the tides to spare them from his terrible ambition." So, not only were we reeling from the introduction to Erda, but we then instantaneously got the huge claim, the revelation, that it was Erda who scattered the Primarchs, not Chaos after all. Now at the time this was incredibly confusing, as the whole premise and foundation of the heresy is the Emperor against Chaos. It's the basis for all of it. Without it there is no heresy, and the scattering was a very integral part of that. The first counter-move by the gods. It's iconic. And so seemingly having that taken away from the ruinous powers, and being told it was Erda instead, well, it just didn't make much sense, and again was just very confusing. I know my mind was reeling, wondering where it was all going to go. Throughout all the mentions of the scattering in the lore, it's always been referred to as the actions of Chaos. When asked by Korax how he came to be here in their reunion, the Emperor told him it was the actions of the denizens of the warp. From our conversations throughout this week, we have seen firsthand and discussed the devastation the scattering unleashed, the deaths, and Chaos's version that the Emperor himself interfered and allowed it. Yet the very next time Malkador references the scattering, in the fury of Magnus, he indeed blamed Erda, and didn't even mention Chaos. No, she saw to that. So maybe the whole Chaos or Emperor debate with the scattering is pointless. It's all been explained, that neither were to blame. It was in truth Erda, and Erda alone all along. That why on earth are we even having this week's conversation, Rho? Well, no. As in the 6th Siege of Terra installment, Warhawk, by author Chris Wraight, the Erda involvement with the scattering was explained in greater detail. Erebus, who was in pursuit of the perpetuals, arrived at Erda's hidden location, claiming to arrive to pay his respects. She looked properly bewildered then. Your respects? Nothing would have been possible. Everything we've done, all we've worked for, it all started with you. The choirs of the Pantheon still sing of it. You are revered, my lady, by those who know the truth. I had to make the time to be here, even though the trail was a long one, and I had to follow a gang of blind wretches through some tricky patches, in case I got lost forever in the mazes. But they're off on their own now, And now I've ended up where I wanted to be all along, with the architect, the mother of it all. Listen, I do not know what portent you've been studying, but something has gone badly wrong with them. No, I am never wrong. You are the architect, the scatterer, the instrument of the gods themselves. At that, she finally began to lose her composure. Gods, this again. What could you possibly know of gods? Look at you. You dress like some mind-touched devil boy kicked out of the village for poisoning the well. Something has misled you, and I do not care what that is. I only care that you leave now, before I become truly angry. Erebus found himself enjoying this. She was as impressive as he'd hoped she'd be. She worked hard to hide it, sure, but now he could feel her power bubbling up from under the surface. It was like nothing he'd encountered before. Not an overt, flashy power, but a subtle one, like an aroma. Maybe you don't even know it yourself, he pressed on. Maybe you believed that you acted alone, for reasons that seemed pure to you. They relish it when that happens. But it was them, all the same. You crippled the enemy before he'd even properly got started. Ha! When the War Master kills him in turn, it will be your name on the lips of the faithful. So Erda was nothing more than an instrument of chaos, after all. The weak link the gods exposed, to, as they say, stop the Emperor's gambit before it had even begun. Erda, an unwitting pawn in the manipulations and schemes of the ruinous powers. Her doubts, anger, were the cracks the gods needed, bringing it back to the ruinous powers, who were truly responsible for the scattering. And it actually all makes sense in this way, in the grand overall scheme, as it's a common theme for it to be reiterated, of the great lengths that Malcador and the Emperor went to hide their project, to make sure it was locked away, hidden and safe, from the entire galaxy. There's a great moment in Jagatai Khan's Primarch novel, where Jagatai remarks to Malcador that they were strangely careless with the Primarchs, when so much rested on their shoulders. And Malcador chides back that more care couldn't have been taken. And within Fury of Magnus, we see the subterranean villas the young Primarchs were to grow up in secrecy, safely beneath the Imperial Palace, where they could learn and be educated for their roles ahead. How it must have taken something on the inside of the Emperor's plan, something close to the project, to be its weakness, enable the gods to interfere, to break the impenetrable walls created by the Emperor. And Erda was that weakness. How exactly did she do it? The action itself? I don't know. I don't recall it being explicitly stated, other than she cast them to the tides, scattered them. Did she create a warp rift which then enabled the gods to act, to embolden it further? Did she lower the walls around the laboratory, or was she merely subtly pushed, whispered in that direction? Who knows? Given the destruction and death that was caused when it all transpired, you'd assume the gods must have leapt on the opportunity in some way, once Erda had exposed it. But as ever with the gods, we'll never know for sure. It does raise some intriguing questions, like why on earth didn't the Emperor immediately wipe her out, seeing as she had literally just been manipulated by the ruinous powers, and could easily become further influenced or even corrupted in the future. Of course, the reality is Erda didn't exist at that point. She was a character not created, you'd assume, until the Siege of Terra. But in the lore, we have seen the Emperor offer Magnus redemption, even contemplate a demon-elevated Mortarion being saved. So he can be surprisingly forgiving at times. It's a conundrum to which I don't think we'll ever see an answer, as this encounter with Erebus would be the end of Erda's story. She would reject his offer to serve the Pantheon, and would be attacked by demons representing the fall. She would win the fight, but barely, mortally wounded, and Erebus would end her with the ancient Aphame dagger. So all in all, the Erda factor most certainly shook up the established lore that we thought we knew of the Primarch scattering. But in truth, it all boiled down to she was merely the vehicle for the gods of chaos. The weakness that penetrated the Emperor's security, and the misguided fool who enabled the gods of chaos to ruin everything. As really from that point on, the already insurmountable odds stacked against them was only ever piled higher. But as always everyone, what do you think? Were you shocked and surprised with the introduction of Erda? How do you feel she became the instrument of the gods? Is it all the classic tale of chaos? The cracks of emotion enabling the gods and influence? And why don't you think the Emperor wiped her out? And was the weakness of Erda the one factor that derailed the Emperor's plan before it had even begun? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.